Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday evening of what is an absolutely beautiful day on campus. My name is Christy Harner. I'm a member of the English department and the director of Fellowships and Scholars Programs, and I'm incredibly excited to welcome back 4 alums to talk about their research on campus, their paths toward graduate school, how they're experiencing graduate school. By way of getting started, though, and really kicking this off, I'm very excited to have Nina Pauchnik here to introduce the event, and I will hand it over to her, our interim dean of the College of Arts and Sciences.
Thank you, Christy. I'm a faculty member in economics department. I've been here for 26 years, and it's so exciting to see all of you here this evening. I'm delighted to join you this evening for this special opportunity to hear from recent alumni about the ways they're building upon their research experiences. I think we are all in for a real treat. In the School of Arts and Sciences, which launched in the beginning of July, we are dedicated to supporting students in every aspect of their undergraduate journey. This means we are not only thinking about the learning that happens inside the classrooms, but in many ways, students' educational experience is shaped outside those walls through things like undergraduate research, off-campus programs, and the full spectrum of co-curricular and extracurricular opportunities available here. Having a dedicated office focused on supporting and guiding students as they apply for fellowship opportunities has been such an important way for us to both serve students and also promote and recognize their amazing accomplishments. The Fellowship Office, focused on supporting, led by Christy Harner, has seen an extraordinary growth under her leadership. We have always known that Dartmouth students and alumni are exceptional. And now, with record numbers of prestigious national and international fellowships being awarded in recent years, the world knows it too. Applications are up. In 2020-21 academic year, 146 applications for fellowships were submitted, compared to last year with 370 applications. That's a 153% increase over 4 years. As a result of that, the number of award winners is also way up. Last year, the total number of Dartmouth recipients, including current students and graduates, was 62, up from 45 the year prior. And 67 graduating seniors or recent graduates were offered grants for postgraduate study and research projects. While the external recognition and awards granted is exciting, I think what is really special is what happens in the application process itself. To me and my colleagues, it is an extension of all the liberal arts educational mission of Dartmouth offers. Students who apply for major fellowships are guaranteed mentorship, support with writing and thinking about future plans, and the opportunity to reflect on their larger aims. The work that Christy and her team are doing to evolve and grow the important program has not gone unnoticed. And so it is my pleasure to share some very exciting news with you today. Tom and Gina Russo, both members of the Dartmouth class of 1977, know from their own experience and that of their daughter, Meredith, a member of the class of 2008, the value of guiding students to win fellowships. They understand how fellowships set our students up for a meaningful life and vocation, and also further the important research that allows our society to continue to evolve. Because of their own powerful experiences, Tom and Gina have made a remarkable gift of $5 million to endow and name the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education, Director of Fellowships and Student Programs, the position currently held by Christy. This will provide permanent resources for the Fellowship Office in their efforts to support and guide more students and alumni on their research journey. We will have an opportunity to thank and celebrate the Russos for their generosity when they are on campus later this month. We are honored and delighted that they have invested in the work we are doing with fellowships at Dartmouth. Please join me in thanking Christy and team for all they are doing, and to the Russos for their extraordinary vote of confidence in this important work.
Thank you very much to Nina Pauchnik for introducing us. I'm now going to, before we start the official panel with the alumni, I won't call you students anymore, although you're all students, continuing to be students. I'll have each of you introduce yourselves a little bit so that when we get to the Q&A later, you all know exactly who you're asking questions of and what types of questions you might want to ask them. And we will start with Mariana.
I have to look to remember what I put on there. Okay, so I'm Mariana Peñalosa Morales. I'm a queer, first-gen, low-income, FISA person. From Miami, Florida. I'm Colombian and Peruvian. On campus, I was really involved politically with organizing. So I did a lot of union organizing. I was part of the now defunct Dartmouth Student Union, doing mutual aid and political education. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then later started organizing for union efforts with the Student Worker Collective at Dartmouth. And then outside of that, I did a lot of prison abolition work and in prisons doing political education as well. I was a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow. I also, as a junior, I was awarded the Beinecke Scholarship for Graduate Study. And now I'm funded in my PhD program, which I'm getting a PhD in geography at University of Minnesota by the National Science Foundation, graduate research fellowship program. And for a little bit about my research, I was also a geography major at Dartmouth, and I also did Lusophone studies, kind of really interested in place and being from Miami and seeing these kind of rhetorics and dominant narratives of Miami's going to sink, Florida is going to cease to exist. I just realized I had a lot of resentment towards that statement, and I still do. When people say that really callously, it hurts me a little bit, and thus that's the focus of my research. So I'm really interested in thinking about how Miamians, myself included, are actively imagining a future for Miami without the kind of nihilistic rhetoric. So thinking, with ethnic studies, indigenous studies, Black studies, Latinx studies, what are the ways that we can perhaps shift our understanding of urban life to be mutual with what we consider, how do we see the built environment and the natural environment as distinct and kind of rupturing that distinction or that boundary. So yeah, that's a little bit about my research, and I'm now, because I'm funded with the NSF-GRFP, I just defended my comprehensive exams. I'm defending my proposal in a couple weeks. And I'm back in Miami doing research and being with family.
Cool. Thank you, Mariana.
Yeah.
Teddy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Teddy. I'm originally from New Jersey. I'm currently in my third year of my PhD studies in chemistry and chemical biology at Princeton. I do RNA biochemistry. I know RNA is a scary word right now, but I started doing research at Dartmouth through the Freshman Research Opportunities in Chemistry program. So I got to do some early hands-on lab work here in Steele. And then I applied to and was fortunate enough to have been named a STAMP scholar, and through that I was able to do research both here at Dartmouth, and I did some research at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston through that funding, so that was really cool. There I became interested in immunology and more of the biology side of things, so I'm now doing research on metabolism of the building blocks of DNA and RNA in cancer cells. This is kind of detailing my life at Princeton so far. I've been able to present my research a bit through some posters and mentor an undergraduate from Rutgers who came through our lab. I'm the president of Queer in Chemistry, so we get the opportunity to invite a queer identifying professor each year to speak both about being queer in the field of chemistry as well as their own research. So this was Polly Arnold, who's the director of the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and is a full professor of chemistry at UC Berkeley. So she was really cool. And this is my lab here on the left and some of my lab mates and my cohort. I got my start doing wet lab research here at Dartmouth, and I was really excited to be able to continue it down in New Jersey. So.
Thanks, Ted. Kat?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kat. I am originally from Washington State, but I went to high school in Arkansas. My family moved a lot, so at Dartmouth, I did a couple different things. I was a part of Spare Rib, which is a zine. You might have heard of it. I did a couple different things with the Center for Social Impact, mainly SEED, which is like a mentorship program for local FGLI students. And then I applied my sophomore year to the STAMP scholarship, and I was lucky enough to receive it. And my project was very interdisciplinary and kind of, I think it started out really broad, so I was really lucky to have like the STAMPS cohort and kind of that community as I was narrowing into what I'm interested in, which ended up being class in literature and how what people read and who people read is a form of social power. So I ended up doing a quantitative sociology project. It was like a logistic changing effects model. If anybody knows what those words mean in that order, but it basically just means I was looking at how the gender and race and class of best-selling and award-winning authors in the US from 1913 to 2023, how that was kind of changing over time and how that matched up with different social movements going on at the same time. So I ended up finding that super interesting. I kind of got to think a lot about what it means for like institutions to name a book a Pulitzer or a National Book Award, and kind of the assumptions we have that like best-selling books like, I don't know, The Hunger Games or 50 Shades of Grey aren't really literary. So it was fun to kind of bring that into the academic sphere. Most recently, I completed my master's in literature and modernity at the University of Edinburgh, and I was lucky enough to receive the Reynolds Scholarship to pursue that, which was super interesting, and I ended up going in kind of another direction with that dissertation, which is like a thesis, but they flip them in the UK. Anyway, I wrote about Anne Carson and experimental forms and how, I guess, kind of the relationship between what you're saying and how you're saying it, and kind of the dynamics there that are kind of influencing how we perceive the world and ourselves, and all these tacit assumptions we make, you know, whether that's about something like gender or, you know, something more abstract like the self. I don't know. So that's kind of me, yeah.
Thanks, Kat. Manu?
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Manu. I'm from Northern Virginia, right outside of DC, and I was a 24 at Dartmouth. I double majored in what is a mouthful, biology modified with engineering and gender studies modified with global health. Yeah, it was honestly quite a bit. I was a STAMP scholar on campus, and that mostly funded my research into sexual minority eating disorder development. So I did a really cool off-term working at Boston University, looking at how for lesbian, gay, and bisexual adolescents, they're more likely to develop things like anorexia or bulimia. But on campus, my main research was doing epidemiology at the Geisel School of Medicine. That was mostly focused on like maternal and nutritional epidemiology and thinking about how moms and babies are exposed to heavy metals, plastics all throughout New Hampshire, which is really cool. And in undergrad, I actually studied abroad 3 times, which was super fun. I did the Berlin study abroad to Germany via the Jewish Studies program. I went to Vietnam with ASCL, and then I also did transfer term to Thailand, where I did marine biology. So all super random stuff. And I think there's one more slide. None of that was connected to what I ended up doing, which was a Fulbright in Taiwan, where I was teaching English for the past year. And 2 months ago, I just started med school at Harvard. So I'm in Boston now, which is really awesome. But happy to talk about anything related to research or these random things I did in undergrad.
Perfect. Thank you all for the introductions. So by way of getting us started on the conversation, I'm going to ask you to go back to the very first moment that you thought about getting involved in research on campus. So Teddy, you talked about this a little bit already, and maybe you can start us off since you first mentioned it, and then we can go down the line. But the first moment, whether it was reaching out to a faculty member, hearing about an opportunity, how did you get started?
Yeah, so the first thing that I want to say is I want to emphasize how easy it is for an undergraduate to do research at Dartmouth. And I say this because I have spoken to a lot of other graduate students who come from a larger public universities where, actually securing a research position in a lab is fairly difficult and requires, consistent self-advocacy to a professor to actually, get them to trust you to work in their lab, something like a chemistry lab, absolutely. So the chemistry department here at Dartmouth has a program for freshmen called Freshman Research Opportunities in Chemistry. And that was like a list of professors who basically, put their name down and said, yes, I'd be willing to, take a freshman on in my lab if they were interested. So I took honors general chemistry my freshman fall, and I liked the professor who taught the class. And in fact, he had space open in his lab, and I said, okay, I have no idea what kind of research you do, but would you let me do research in your lab? And he said, yeah. So he was able to set that up with me. But I know that a lot of my friends were able to secure similar research positions simply by reaching out to professors with a genuine curiosity, interest, and a reason why you may be successful in the lab. Continuing forward, there were some other opportunities that were presented to me to continue doing research. The chemistry department for juniors had like a small little fellowship stipend called the Zabriskie Undergraduate Research Fellowship, which let me do research here at Dartmouth for another term over the summer and get paid to do that research, which was really awesome. For context, half of my undergraduate was during COVID. I know COVID's a scary word now. But that was awesome because it was able to let me make up for some of the time that I missed being able to do research on campus, and it gave me the opportunity to do that over the summers later on in my career. So I guess my answer to how I got involved in research is a pretty straightforward one through that program. But I think the overall advice is I think it's actually pretty easy to get involved in research here at Dartmouth. Yeah.
Go this way.
So for me, I think it started freshman fall when I took a class which is just Intro to Sociology with Professor Mark Dixon. I'm sure some of you guys have taken it because it's kind of ubiquitous. I don't know. But anyway, I ended up emailing him the term after that, and I was like, are you doing any research? Can I be involved? And he was like, yeah, let's Zoom. He kind of talked about what he was doing. It was about the efficacy of non-governmental environmental certifications. Not really what I'm interested in now, but it was interesting. I was basically just collecting data and then like kind of messing with it in Stata. So that was fun. I did that for a term, and then my freshman year was over, and I just kind of, fell into other things. And then sophomore year, I applied to the Presidential Scholarship Program, and I worked with Professor Carolyn Dever on the Diaries of Michael Field, which, if you know Michael Field, which you probably don't, it's the pseudonym for this English lesbian aunt-niece couple duo who wrote together. Yes, you heard that right. Anyway.
They're amazing.
They're actually so brilliant and so funny. I highly recommend, you can Google them, and the first link that'll come up is like this Dartmouth like online resources. And I would definitely recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in just like autobiography or even just like funny women. I don't know. But anyway, I was transcribing those entries and kind of figuring out like, oh, they're mentioning this word with a lot of consonants, and we don't really know what the consonants are. It's actually the name of a champagne brand that's been defunct for however many years, and I would write like a footnote about that. So completely different, again, from what I ended up doing. And then I took a class actually my senior year with Professor Jason Houle, which was just about quantitative sociology, which I'd done a little bit of before, but had just kind of not known a ton about. And that's where we really got into statistical methods and like regression and kind of all of that fun stuff that you might vaguely remember from AP Stats. And I just was obsessed with it and ended up kind of falling in love with all of that. And so I think my research trajectory has not really been linear. I've kind of jumped around and done a couple of different things. I mean, even my master's, super qualitative, super like archival kind of. So like nothing has really been the same, but I think I've really appreciated the breadth of opportunities that were available to me, so.
Just to quickly get like a gauge of where you guys are at, how many of you are 26s? Can you raise your hands? Okay, 27s, 28s, 29s. I'm so washed up. Okay.
Imagine me.
Okay, that's really good to know. Because I will say I came into Dartmouth not having any high school research experience, which I know that a handful of folks do. But I did come in as pre-med, so I sort of knew that research was something that I should get involved in and also was pretty interested in doing. I think I was very clear with myself in that I never wanted to do any sort of like wet lab, basic science work. Yeah, I knew that from the start and I have no regrets about that. So what I basically did is I just went through like the DHMC and the Geisel website and I looked through a bunch of professors' like work. And Professor Megan Romano's lab was doing really interesting work on like health outcomes in mothers and kids. So I basically just shot her a cold email and I was like, hey, like, I've never done research before. You don't have to pay me. I can get money from UGAR or URAD, whatever it is. Would you be willing to take me on? And a lot of the times, professors are super responsive to that sort of thing. And even if they aren't, like there were a few times where, because I'd send out a few different emails just to get a feel for different labs, even if they weren't willing to take me on or able to, they would almost always put me in touch with someone else who's interested in taking me on. So yeah, I'd say that like research can take up a lot of your time in undergrad, and doing it just to sort of check off a box for like future grad school applications is something that you shouldn't do because it's like kind of just a waste of time if you're not interested in it at all. So making sure that you're kind of intentional about the areas or disciplines that you're interested in, and kind of willing to, like as long as you're willing to try different things out, I feel like it's super valuable.
Yeah, I guess for context, I'm a 22, I forgot to mention that. So I started Dartmouth fall 2018. And I say that because I feel like potentially some of my experiences are not like easily transferable. Like I was here when there was no union, right? Like that was part of my senior year organizing efforts. Anyway, all that to say, sophomore year, I needed money, to be honest. Like my dad is a newspaper delivery driver. My mom at the time was a custodian and a cashier. She's now just a cashier, but I just did not have the luxury of getting paid subpar wages by Novak to subsidize my travel from Miami to Dartmouth amongst winter clothes. So I had taken a class in Portuguese and I got, I guess, talking about like my experience or just, I guess, the struggles that I was facing with this professor in a one-on-one meeting, and he encouraged me to apply for a UGAR like sophomore research scholars program in order to do translation work for him. So this professor is Carlos Menchillo. So I translated like poetry by a street poet, Poeta Valancini, into like from Portuguese into English for his research. And that was a really great experience. And through him, I learned about the Mellon Mays program as well. Originally, I came in thinking I was going to do pre-law or like go to law school after. And I think it wasn't until like I had those like moments, majority of which were during my sophomore year, and we were still in person, that I guess like I fell into research and I really enjoyed the experience. So yeah, and then end of my sophomore year, by the time that COVID, I guess the outbreak happened, that was like March 2020, and that's when I found out that I was doing Mellon Mays. So like doing my own research versus doing, I guess, research with professors. So yeah, I say that because that's kind of how I fell into it. Like I just had, it was a means to an end, and then I realized that it was really enjoyable, and I did not realize that like people were getting paid, at least in the social sciences, arts, humanities, paid to read. I was like, wait, this is actually really cool. So I've really enjoyed that aspect of it. Yeah.
I will just clarify that because you are at 22, the Sophomore Research Scholars Program is now URAD.
Okay.
So if any of you are like, I have no idea what she's talking about, that is what it is now called. So I'm going to take the question about what research you were doing on campus and push it to its limit, I guess, to say, what are you most proud of? And it could be a single thing, a particular conference paper, a day where everything worked well in the lab. What is it that you were most proud of? And I'll start this one with Manu maybe, and we'll go to Mariana first and then back that way.
Yeah, sounds good. Again, from basically January of my freshman year through my senior year, I was working in this epidemiology lab. And around my junior year, I'd been doing a lot of research, but none of it had really culminated in a project. So I got on Zoom with my PI, and I was like, I really want to like write a paper and have something that's published. So she started kind of looking for opportunities, and super randomly, one of her, like, I guess, PhD batchmates was now an epidemiologist at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. And she basically had this really cool opportunity to be first author on this paper that was focused on PFAS, which are like basically like these environmental contaminants that are super bad for you in fish oil supplements, which is really cool because the argument was like, you know, PFAS get in the water, the fish eat them, and then we take these concentrated little pills of them, like, are they super bad for you? So that was sort of a year-long process where I was kind of leading a collaboration between my lab at Dartmouth and also a separate epidemiology lab out of MSK in New York. And that was really cool because I'd never sort of taken on that level of responsibility before. I feel like a lot of the times in undergrad, like, it's very easy to sort of ask your professor for a little bit of work and they kind of hand it to you. But in this project, I was managing like a team of people working on biostats. Like I was corresponding with both of the PIs to make sure that whatever needed to get written was written. And eventually did get published, and I was able to present it, which was really cool. I think that my main takeaway from that is that if there is something that you want in a research lab or an experience that you're looking for, it's always best to articulate it with your PI or the professor. Because at the end of the day, they're there to help you. So for me, at least, I wanted more responsibility that would end in a product that I was proud of. And I don't think that would have been possible unless I straight up just told her that that was what I was looking to do for the next year or so. So just remember that you sort of have agency in those situations, because sometimes it is a little bit scary to advocate for yourself when, you know, there are a lot of PhD students or other students who are older than you that you think may supersede you in the sort of hierarchy of your labs.
The majority of my time at Dartmouth, since having Mellon Mays, like my last 2 years, I was doing my own research. So I was focusing on what is now, I guess, like the basis of my dissertation, which I was really curious, like, why is it that Miami's getting sentenced to death in anticipation of catastrophe? Kind of akin to what was happening with New Orleans and Katrina, Puerto Rico and Maria and Irma. So like really thinking about like, what is it about these places that make them vulnerable to catastrophe and also okay with letting catastrophe happen to them? I can give a really simple and basic answer, which is what it is, which is racism. So like thinking critically about like, so how does race like inform like natural disaster, with a particular focus on Miami. Again, since my 2 years were just kind of doing my own research, I would say like that proudest moment was having a printed version of my thesis that I now refer to whenever I'm like, wait, when did I say that? Or like, I need to like reference something. I'm like, I'm just gonna plagiarize myself. Because it's not, I think my year, they still weren't publishing it online. So there's only the printed copy that exists, and it's me and Tish Lopez who has it.
And Rauner.
Oh, okay, don't tell me that. Don't steal my stuff. Yeah, so it's, I feel like that was like having a physical copy of like my 2 years of work was so cool and interesting, and to be able to like use that to now essentially argue for my dissertation, which is like how are people, despite these like common narratives that are fundamentally like racist and classist and xenophobic, like how are Miamians like imagining otherwise, like making a claim to this place that people are so easily writing off? Yeah.
I would say my proudest moment was the first time I got to present at a scientific conference. All of the research that I got to do with stamps culminated in presenting at an American Chemical Society conference at Northeastern. And I signed up to do a poster, and I randomly signed up to do a flash talk. And they accepted me to do a flash talk, which was cool. So I got to present to a bunch of MIT and Harvard and Boston University professors. I actually met a couple of professors who are now professors at Princeton in chemistry. And being in the room with the people whose papers I had been reading was a really cool moment. And talking about my own work to them was shoulders of giants moment. So I was really proud of that, and that was a little crazy. It was the weekend after commencement. So I went from graduating, and I was here's my work that I just worked on for 2 years. So it was very cool.
So for me, I already mentioned that I think I started my stamps project in a very broad place. I was interested in sociology and literature and cultural theory, which is just you could literally write 1 million books on that and not run out of things to say. It's so broad. And so my first year of my stamps project, I did a bunch of different things. I did a publishing internship in London through stamps, which was amazing. I did so much kind of personal reading across genres and fields. I kind of collected a bunch of random data because I just got really obsessed with the history of the Pulitzer Prize. So I had this spreadsheet, and it had genuinely 50 or 60 variables, gender, race, hometown, birthday, just all of these things about these authors. It was obsessive. And so then I came in to my second year, and I was okay, I have a lot of stuff. Oh, I was also doing a bunch of creative writing that was kind of related. So I had all this stuff, and I was I don't know how I make this a thing that makes sense to somebody else. And so then kind of came in that class that I mentioned with Professor Houle, Chasing the Causal Dragon, that's what it's called, which is just a great name anyway. But I remember the first day of class, I was oh, this is it. This is my thing. And I emailed him, and I was he was does anybody want to do their final group project alone, whatever, if you want to make it part of your thesis? And I was yeah, that he was just set up a meeting with me. So I set up a meeting with him, and I told him I'd kind of thought about what I wanted to do, and I was interested in the Pulitzer Prize. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he was that won't work at all. You have too many variables and not enough of a sample size. And also, most people who do this kind of quantitative social science research, they, at the undergrad level, have a pre-existing data set that they just pull from government records or I don't know, just open source data. And what I wanted, there was no data on nobody's coding the data of best-selling and award-winning books. It just didn't exist. And so and the best-selling thing, I just kind of thrown it out there, and I was yeah, it's interesting. Why do these books that get read more than any other book they don't win prizes. And, you know, best-selling books are more frequently by women because women read more than men. And I just kind of threw that out there. And he was like, yeah, that should be your thing, like bestsellers versus award winners. But it's too bad because there's no way you could collect enough data. And I was like, let me try. So then I walked across the street from Blunt to Bakerberry to my stamps office, and I burst into tears because I was like, I finally found this thing, which is exactly what I want to do, and I can't do it because I don't have enough time. And it was also just like, you know how it is, sometimes Dartmouth terms, they're so intense, and sometimes you have terms that are just like, you're flying by, and sometimes everything is so intense, and that was like kind of an intense term for me. It just felt like a lot was happening like in school and like with my own personal life. And I was like, but I'm gonna do this. And so I would spend like 4 or 5 hours a day just like coding data, sometimes more. I would literally spend my Saturdays just like putting data into a spreadsheet in Google Sheets. Like, it was not glamorous, but I did it, and I finished the project like by the end of the term, like, or that component. I was still collecting data into the winter, clearly, because it was a lot of data. But I think just like finishing that term and handing in my final project, which I'd like done alone, like, and it had kind of been the thing that I worked on when it felt like, I don't know, it felt like that was the thing that I was meant to be doing, and I was just on these Wikipedia pages, and I could feel it all like in my head. There were just like books and like quotes from like random authors in the 1920s, and it was just like they were in my head all the time, just because I was looking at Google Sheets with all their like life data, and I was reading their Wikipedia pages. And I don't know, I think just that feeling of being like, oh, it's not even that I have collected this data, it's just that like this is in my brain now, and it's kind of like it comes to me when I'm like walking around. I don't know, I think I think I'm making this so like dramatic, and Manu is gonna make fun of me because he doesn't believe in the humanities. But I don't know, for me it was just like a really transformative term and like a transformative project. And I think it's something that can seem mundane, but for me, I found a lot of meaning in it, so.
I don't know if it would make you feel better or worse or what, but we now use you as an example of like the double major is possible. And like you can do the same project in 2 totally different ways and think about the topic in 2 totally different ways. And the work you did in sociology and the work you did in creative writing were part of the same swirl in your head. And to say that you fought to do it and to make it possible and then achieved it in both majors is amazing.
Thank you.
And I would also add that women have always read more than men.
That's true.
And written more than men. And written more than men. That's important too. Okay, so thinking about grad school, the question I would be curious to hear is when did grad school first become a possibility for you? When did you first start thinking like, okay, this is what I want to do, this is the right step? And what was your process of finding a list of schools, figuring out recommenders, all of the logistics of applying? And let's start with you, Mariana.
Okay. Yeah, so if folks are familiar with the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship, pretty much as you're applying, you have to say that you want to go to graduate school. I didn't necessarily believe that at the time that I was applying, because again, like I had only just recently fallen into doing research when the application was due my sophomore year. So I still thought, I was like, I'm gonna do this because it's extra cash. Again, no union yet. So I was like really thinking about like the monetary aspect of it. And I was just like, I think it's like cool to do research and all that stuff. But I think once I was actually in the program and like, I don't know, I just saw how interesting everyone's projects were and like what it's like to be a professor, like the kind of hidden curriculum of going into academia. I kind of had like a light bulb moment. So I feel like my project is quite interdisciplinary. I'm really thinking about like narrative, and I'm also, the way that I'm situating how people are imagining living Miami otherwise is through cultural production. So like visual art, media, prose, poetry. So I was kind of deciding, and also I'm thinking about ethnic studies actively, so I was kind of deciding between like, should I do a geography PhD or an American Studies PhD? And that's kind of how I tailored my list. And I was guided by Professor Michelle Warren, but I only applied to, I believe, 6 schools. So it was Yale American Studies, NYU American Studies, Temple Geography, University of Minnesota Geography, University of Washington, like UW Geography, and I don't know what else. It's like I'm blanking on it at the moment. Oh, Rutgers Geography. So I was quite committed to working with junior scholars. That's something that I had done at Dartmouth as well. Like I worked with Professor Jorge Cuellar, who at the time was just transitioning out of the Cesar Chavez Fellowship, postdoc fellowship. And I was working with Professor Tish Lopez, who is now a professor at University of Washington after being denied tenure here. And both of whom are people of color. So that was really important to me. Like I wanted to work with junior faculty of color. So that's also one of the reasons why I applied to these programs. Ultimately, I decided between Yale American Studies and University of Minnesota Geography. And as I was talking to professors, I just like really like the vibe of Minnesota a lot more. I had to be honest with myself about like what is it that I wanted out of a graduate program. And I think American Studies is like probably where I would want to go teach in, but as a grad student, I felt like the attention to the spatial is not as important, right? If I'm like really thinking about Miami critically, it's like I have to attend to like how it was made. It's like a relatively young city, despite Florida being one of the very first places in America that was like quote unquote discovered. Like Florida was discovered in 1513, but Miami was only incorporated in 1896. So there's like this huge gap that I feel like is interesting, but I wasn't gonna be able to explore that through just like a performance studies lens. So I just chose a geography department that was like willing and open to have a more interdisciplinary project. But yeah, that's kind of where I was at with that.
Jump to the other PhD student.
Sure, yeah. I knew that I wanted to do a PhD pretty quickly, I think. And that's funny because during my senior year, I applied to everything that was not PhDs kind of first. So I will say, when it gets to senior year and you are considering thinking about applying to fellowships, jobs, graduate school, like you're gonna need to plan it like it's gonna be an extra class. At least that's how it felt for me.
Yeah.
I, like, to be completely honest, I applied for the Rhodes Fellowship, I applied for the Churchill and the Marshall and a Fulbright. I also applied for like a bunch of consulting jobs at the time, and then I also applied to PhD programs. And I think like the job applications were like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna get into grad school, like let me give myself a backup plan, because I really did want to do a PhD. The thing with chemistry is there were not many chemistry students in the department who go on to do a PhD, so I definitely had to seek out mentors who could help coach me through that application process. There were a couple of people who like graduated from Dartmouth and then worked for a couple of years and then applied, so I kind of reached out to them, and they were able to help me through writing like my personal statements. And I was also able to reach out to some of the other STAMP scholars who maybe weren't necessarily in my subfield, but could still give, a good sense of what it is like to apply to a basic science PhD program. I was pretty locationally motivated in my my parents were like, go to undergraduate in the middle of nowhere and like have a real campus experience, because both of my parents did their undergraduates in cities. So I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, go and do an undergraduate on campus, and then you can think about being closer to an urban center for grad school. Princeton is not like a city. Okay, it's close. I mean, I'm relatively close to New York and to Philly, which I appreciate because my family's from there. But in terms of like when it came down to my choices, I was between Caltech and Northwestern and Princeton. Everybody has their own, reasons for why they choose a place. Mine had somewhat to do with family, somewhat to do with faculty size. I'm very lucky to be a part of a larger institution that, while public science funding is currently under attack, it's really nice to be in a public institution that has a lot of legal power and financial resources that allows you to continue to do your research at a time even when that research funding is being pulled. So that's something that I really appreciate about being at Princeton as an institution. They pay a good graduate student stipend. They guarantee graduate student housing, which is really nice. We're pretty awkward. We're the only ones that failed our graduate student union vote. All of our peers did approve their graduate student union votes. Ours was a complicated situation that you can ask me about if you want to talk about it. But yeah, so I mean, you could say I looked undecided my senior year in terms of how much I applied to, but at the end of the day, I really did want to go to graduate school. But in the chemistry department, there weren't that many people who were familiar with that, so I did have to kind of source some of my own information for how to apply to it. But there were definitely resources through stamps that I could get a general sense for.
So I think kind of like you, I kind of came in really early knowing I wanted to go to graduate school. I mean, like, genuinely, I think I was like 10 years old. Yeah, like, I'll get a PhD one day. And I think that's just because my parents had a really circular educational journeys. They both were low income and joined the Army at a very young age because it was like the only way they could make money. But then they both went back to school like later in their lives. Like my dad got his bachelor's and then he got like 2 masters. My mom like did a kind of similar thing. And I think seeing them find so much fulfillment in education versus like not that much fulfillment in their jobs realistically. Some people love the Army. Some people don't, and that's okay. Anyway, I think like seeing how much fulfillment they got, I was like, wow. Like, it is like what you said too, Mariana. It's like getting paid to read. That's incredible. So even at Dartmouth, it was kind of like, I know I'll get a master's, maybe more than one. I'll eventually get a PhD. It was just a matter of when. And so I don't even think I really ever considered getting a job right after Dartmouth, because I felt like I was ready to leave like Hanover, but I wasn't ready to stop learning full time. In terms of like the actual like logistics, schematics of it all, I think that was also my senior fall. So like I said, I was a little disorganized, but I applied to a couple different like funding sources, like Fulbright, that kind of thing. And then I applied also with like the Dartmouth funding office. I knew I wanted to go abroad just because I felt like I wanted to experience what education was like outside of the American system. That was just something that was really important to me. I applied to 3 schools, which I know is not that many. I think my list was longer at one point, but I think I applied to 3. Oh, I know what happened. The first school I applied to was the University of Amsterdam, and I got in at the beginning of January. And I was like, I'm okay with that. Like, I'm gonna apply to 2 more schools, and then I'm gonna stop because I'm okay with the University of Amsterdam. So I only applied to 3 schools, and then I was pretty much set even when I applied for the Reynolds Scholarship. I was like, yeah, I'm going to the University of Amsterdam. I accepted and everything. I was also just studying like contemporary literature there. And then when I got my funding, it was like the day that the English department has like a dinner for their honors students in Norwich at the inn. And my professors were all like, oh, like, you picked Amsterdam between Amsterdam and Edinburgh? Like, you should have picked Edinburgh. And I was like, oh, well. And I went home and I looked at my computer and the offer had expired 2 weeks ago. And I was like, well. And then I opened the portal and it was like, accept, deny. And I was like, I'm gonna click accept, even though it was 2 weeks late. And I emailed them and I was like, I know I accepted late. Is this okay? And nobody replied, but they did let me in. And I did go. So I think I was a little disorganized, but it did work out for me. I don't know if I would recommend what I did in hindsight, but also like I was writing 2 theses. I think I just didn't have a lot of energy to give to it, like realistically. And it did work out for me. I had a great experience at Edinburgh. I really, really recommend it. The UK system is really interesting, like sociologically too. But yeah, that's what I have to say.
I would clarify on what Kat has been talking about, not about the Edinburgh thing, and that was a great decision, but on the Reynolds Scholarship, it's one of the endowed Dartmouth postgraduate grants, which means that a pool of money was given to the college quite a long time ago in the case of the Reynolds to fund Dartmouth alums who are going on to graduate school outside of the US. And that is something that people apply for every year, and we probably have around 10 winners every year. It's a really lovely opportunity.
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. Being completely honest, I came in knowing that I was pre-med, so I started doing pre-med classes my freshman fall. And then sort of halfway through sophomore year, I signed up for honors orgo, and it was really hard, and I dropped it, so then I stopped being pre-med, and I did consulting recruiting. And then that didn't work out, so I was like, okay, I guess I'll just go back to being pre-med. One thing that I think that I did that was a little bit unique is that I actually applied straight through to medical school. For those that don't know, the med school admissions process is basically an entire calendar year long. So I'd submitted my applications in May of my junior year, and then I'd gotten my last decision back in April of my senior year. Because you like submit them, and then there's a round of essays you have to submit, and then there's a round of interviews. The way that I made my school list, because I was going straight through, and most people take gap years, I decided to only apply to schools that I would be super, super happy about going to right away. Most people apply to normally like between 25 to 30 med schools. I think I ended up applying to maybe 13 or 14. And having made that decision, I think it took a lot of weight off my plate in that, A, I was sort of in the school context already. When my friends were working, I was just working on my applications. And at the same time, like worst case, I didn't get in anywhere. And then I would just have like a fun gap year and I'd reapply again. So that's always an option that I'm happy to talk to folks more about. So of the 14 that I applied to, I ended up getting into maybe, I think like 7 or 8 of them, which was really nice. And I ended up choosing between, I think, Harvard, Hopkins, and Stanford, which was super awesome to have that choice. And I think the reason I ended up choosing Harvard is because I was talking to a lot of physicians who said that one of the most important things about choosing medical school is where you want to end up practicing. Just because, you go through medical school and you end up, networking with physicians and your professors, and that is your professional network. So it's really valuable to sort of know the hospital systems through that experience. And I knew that I kind of wanted to be in the Northeast / I didn't really want to go to Maryland or California. So I decided on HMS, which has been super awesome.
So follow-up question for you, Manu. You did the Fulbright in your gap year, which meant you deferred med school since you had applied to go straight. What was behind that decision to apply for and then do the Fulbright?
Yeah, so I applied straight through to medical school, again, only to like that sort of select number of schools I'd be really happy to go to. But honestly, I didn't really want to go to med school right away. Why I applied straight through was a good question. I feel like I kind of did it. Like I had everything kind of all set up. And I knew that like on a gap year, it's not more difficult, but there are some more challenges in applying in that like your interviews are going to be Tuesday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., i.e. the work day. So I figured like I could just pop out of class my, junior fall, or my senior fall, and it would be okay. It would be more easy to do that. But I applied only to Fulbright. Like that was the only post-grad fellowship I applied to, because I had studied abroad in Asia for quite a bit of my I'd studied abroad in Asia prior, and I'd really wanted to live in East Asia for a while. And I also like working with little kids a lot, so I thought that being an elementary school teacher would be super fun. For reference, I also don't speak like any Mandarin really, so I kind of just applied to Taiwan on a whim, and then I won it, which was super awesome. And then HMS was nice enough to let me defer for the year. I think people who end up doing the Fulbright ETA have a lot of different motivations. Like I think within my cohort in Taiwan, like maybe 50% were really interested in education access, educational equity, becoming teachers. And the other 50%, like a lot of them were doing grad school and kind of just wanted like a fun gap year where you could like teach and travel a lot. That was like funded through the Department of State. I definitely fell in the latter category, but it was still a really awesome opportunity. So I'd highly recommend if anyone's thinking about it, / just wants the opportunity to live abroad where like the government finds you housing, insurance, like everything, it's like the best gig for that.
Yeah. Quick flag that we had 32 winners for the Fulbright this past cycle, which is a Dartmouth record by over 10. So lots of people on their Fulbrights just arriving in country right now, which is really exciting. So some of you probably know them, stay in touch, talk to them about their experiences, because it's definitely something to keep on your radar. And the nice thing about Fulbright is that you can apply for so many years after graduation. We just had like a 20 win this year. We have an 18 applying right now. So it's an option for something where you go and do grad school or you go and do work, and then you decide that it's the right time to do a Fulbright.
I just wanted to add a couple things about like maybe trying to sell you on a PhD. Number one, I have like very solid guaranteed like job security for the next 4 years, which is really awesome. Like, I mean, I get pretty solid health insurance. There's university subsidized housing. And like at a time when like a lot of science companies are having layoffs, like Pfizer just did another round of layoffs, a lot of these biotech companies, like having that job security is great. I'm really appreciative of the fact that my work feels moral and ethical. And there's definitely like a salary trade-off for doing moral and ethical work, but it's awesome in that it keeps me motivated in terms of what I'm doing. You know, I'm probably pulling sometimes 50 to 60 hour weeks in the lab. And also, I would say, those are my two things that I have. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with that. And to pull you into potentially thinking about an arts, humanities, or social science PhD, you don't work in a lab. So,
Right.
but yeah, you break a bone, $10. That's like the best thing about graduate health insurance. Like you trip and you have a little cut, $10.
Yeah.
You need surgery, $10. Like I love it. I think it's honestly the best part of my graduate experience is like, the job security. Like if you are thinking about PhD, like there's some programs that offer guaranteed funding. Mine is one of them. So despite the fact that I'm currently on NSF, and if the current administration decides to pull that funding, my department is still responsible to pay me.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that like sense of security.
So final question, and you can make this as fun or however you want to respond in that way. What is it or was it like being a grad student? You've talked about health insurance, you've talked about job security, both of which are incredibly important. You've also talked about 50, 60-hour weeks in the lab. What is it day-to-day, week-to-week life of being a grad student like, and across 4 very different environments? Manny, you just started, so maybe you should speak to this.
I may not be the best because I started like 2 months ago, but med school's honestly, I think, easier than Dartmouth was, which is pretty surprising. I think it depends a lot on what med school you end up going to, but at least at HMS, it's completely pass-fail for your first year. And this first class that we're taking, it's called Foundations, like Foundations in Biochemistry or whatever. It's basically just like doing Bio 12, and then it's like flipped classroom, like the content is super similar. I imagine that will change a ton once I'm, like in the hospital and doing clinical rotations. But culturally, I think it's been super, super inquisitive. People are really smart. They're from all sorts of different backgrounds. You get a much bigger age demographic than you do in undergrad. And similarly, I think that sometimes it's hard to like get opportunities like shadowing or like working in a hospital when you're an undergrad. But if you are interested in doing medicine or health sciences, like being in med school is sort of like a golden ticket to that sort of thing. Like I don't remember, this happened like 2 days ago. I emailed one of my professors because I was interested in like shadowing, I think it was radiation oncology. And within like, I think 10 minutes, he had set me up with like 3 different like doctors at Mass Gen, like one of the Harvard teaching hospitals in Boston, for like the next month, because they're so like interested, engaged, and like keeping you in the system, because it is fundamentally very different than undergrad, right? Like in undergrad, everyone's sort of going on their own paths, which I think is very evident by this panel. But once you're in grad school, I think that you find people that reflect your academic and professional interests a lot more closely, and similarly, the mentorship that you glean from that is really, really useful and specific. So yeah, and maybe I can't be like a full plug for med school because it'll definitely get much harder, but the first few months have been super awesome.
And Kat, since you finished, maybe you can give that perspective.
Okay, so most master's programs in the UK are just 1 year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between the American and the British systems, just because I think it's good to know going in if you're looking at any sort of like graduate study abroad. So the biggest difference, I had 4 contact hours a week, which basically means I had 2 classes that were actually meeting in person, and they were both meeting once a week for 2 hours, which is, I mean, obviously very different. You all are taking 3 or 4 classes, and you have class probably every day. I think my first term, I only had class on Fridays, so I had a 6-day weekend. Obviously not actually, but that was super different. There also, for my program, literature, we had no assignments. We just had to read 2 books a week and like go to class and say things that sounded smart, which is a lot of work, to be fair, but I didn't have to like turn in discussion posts all the time. So I think it kind of changed the relationship I had to reading, where I wasn't like taking notes or like reading in a way where I was thinking about what assignment I was going to do immediately. It was more like, what am I getting out of this text, and what do I find is interesting, and what like conversations do I feel like are happening and that I want to bring up. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a lot of like hours to read 2 books a week plus like secondary sources, and like if you really want to like show off in class, you got to listen to some podcasts or something. So like the hours were filled, but I think genuinely I had so much freedom in how I was structuring my time and how I wanted to engage with the material. So the way that we were graded, for us, it was at the end of every class, you submitted a 4,000-word essay. That was your 1 grade, so kind of all or nothing. But if you picked an essay topic that you liked, I think it worked out really well. And ostensibly, you're working on it the whole term. Ostensibly. I mean, you guys are all working on your finals from week 1, right? So, that was also really different. I think not having the flexibility of like maybe getting a bad mark and then working it up, it was what it was. The marking is also really different. It's 0 to 100, but a 70 is a really good grade. Like, it's a really good grade. That's what people aim for. 80s are like very rare, 90s unheard of. So kind of just like adjusting. I think I opened my first assignment and it was like a 72, and I was like, I don't think this is good, but it actually was. So I think just kind of, it changed a lot of like the way I was engaging with what I was learning, and also I had to be a lot more intentional in structuring my own time. And then the last thing I wanted to say was just, I think it's so lovely to be in a cohort of people who are all interested in what you're interested in. And it's not even just like in classes, I've met people that I know I'll be talking to for the rest of my life. Like I think you find such connections in grad school, at least for me. Like it was only a 12-month program, but I feel like really close to my cohort. And even like outside class, like my flatmate was on my course, and like we would just like wander into each other's rooms to look at our books, or we would all go like read on the meadows, the green. So I think it was just completely different, but it was still like studying. And I think for me it's helpful to know that like learning can look like a lot of different things. So
Yeah, I'd say the chemistry PhD in the US and most basic sciences PhDs are pretty well defined and structured. So your first year is going to be, starting with your research lab as well as taking classes. So like we took 3 classes a semester for 2 semesters. And then my second year, I taught in addition to research. Then we're on fellowship for our 3rd year, so I am just conducting research at the moment. And then sometimes you may be asked to teach in your 4th or 5th years. I'm doing my PhD in biochemistry, so that's normally like a 6-year PhD. I'd say the first 2 years were definitely very chaotic, getting your course requirements done and your teaching requirements done. Then it kind of falls back into a more regular. I mean, people are like, so what are you doing over the summer? I'm like, I don't have a summer. Let's be real. I'm an adult. It's like a 12-month paid research position. No, what I mean to say is like, as a PhD science graduate student, you're going to be working like a full year research gig. I would say Princeton is pretty similar to Dartmouth in terms of culture and in terms of campus. The chemistry department is really large. It's the largest graduate department on campus. So my cohort of PhD students is 45 PhD students per year. So I guess if you're, chemistry departments range in size. Some of them at like really large university institutions can have upwards of 35, 40 faculty members that are like running full research labs on campus, and that can get even larger when you have like medical schools on campus and research related to that. In terms of like life as a graduate student, yeah, I am pulling sometimes longer hours in the lab. I have a bit more flexibility on that, so like I'm a music fan, so if I want to try to catch a concert in the city on a Tuesday, maybe that means I leave work early on a Tuesday.
I'm going to interrupt you to remind you that when we invited you here last year, you said no because you were going to Taylor Swift.
Don't ask me about Taylor Swift right now.
debut with the new album.
So yes, guilty as charged. If I wanted to catch a concert on a Tuesday, then maybe I'm willing to go into the lab on a Sunday. And in fact, I was at Friday Night Rock last night here at Dartmouth. So I think there is a way to have like a life as a PhD student. And I'd also encourage you, like, just because you want a PhD doesn't mean that everything in your undergraduate that you do as an undergraduate has to relate to that interest. Like, yes, I did do research here, but like I didn't even talk about, I double majored in art history modified with English. I was the editor-in-chief of the Stone Fence Review literary magazine. I was in the wind ensemble for a bit. I was in the Brovertones a cappella group. So I definitely would encourage you all to do stuff that's completely unrelated to anything that you might want to do post-grad because it feeds your soul.
Renaissance man.
Mariana? I'm trying to like kind of mimic the information that you gave. I Hello? Okay. Since going straight through, and I didn't have a master's, I did 3 years of coursework. I was not on fellowship until I got the NSF, so I TA'd for the first 2 years of my PhD, so TAing while taking classes. Yeah, and I found any excuse possible to leave Minneapolis at least once a month. My first year, I think the second year, the city kind of grew on me, so I stayed a little bit longer. But I was like traveling to see friends that had just graduated as well and like were living in different places, or just like friends that had graduated maybe a year or two before me. Conferences, I like went to any conference imaginable that I was like remotely interested in. And then also just to like come back to Miami. That was like really important for me as well. My third year, I finished coursework my fall semester. So after that, I relatively did not have any like on-campus responsibilities, because at that point I did have the NSF GRFP, which I applied to my sophomore year. LOL. My second year of the PhD.
Oh, I just wanted to say the NSF just got rid of that.
The second year option.
So the second year option, so you can apply
In the
as an
first year.
incoming and first year, but they
Yeah.
no longer have the second year option.
Well, I was really lucky to get my second year, is what I'm hearing. Yeah, so I didn't have to TA as I was finishing coursework or as I was preparing for my comprehensive exams, and that looks kind of differently across universities. Like I'm not sure, Teddy, what your process is like, but even in the University of Minnesota system, I have a friend who's in public health and her exams are all oral versus mine are timed, and they're long essays. So I did them consecutively just recently, but it's like I get a question Monday morning, I have until Friday evening to respond to that question in 5,000 words. Lots of pressure. But it was like a really interesting and like kind of fruitful process. So for the semester before this one, so like last spring, I was just reading all the things on my reading list in order to prepare me for the exam. And yeah, I have a fellowship now, so I'm just in Miami doing exploratory research, and then once I defend my proposal, I can submit to the ethics review board, so the IRB, and actually do interviews. And I'm hoping to finish between 5.5 and 6 years. But we shall also see what the job market and the state of education is by that time. Yeah.
So I've asked a lot of questions, and we have a little bit of time left. We have a microphone that can circulate through the room. If anyone has any questions for our alums, just raise your hand.
I want to ask this question to Teddy. So you talked about just like the various amount of paths you're considering, like going to like the job field or like applying to PhDs or like other grants. And I wanted to ask, since we have like some chemistry grad students here, like did you ever talk to any graduate students here about their processes, and how did you learn from them?
Yeah, I definitely had conversations with some of the chemistry grad students in the department, and they gave recommendations for, how to frame your experiences and trying to sell yourself that you may add value to a professor's lab. Like maybe here's an interesting perspective or an interesting technique that you're well versed on that you can bring to a lab that may make that valuable. They also were able to share with me, how some chemistry departments are known to differ between each other, and that, so for example, there are some chemistry departments that have required mandatory lab rotations where you rotate between 3 different labs for a month each to try to get a feel for, what lab you're interested in, whereas some other programs are like you should know who you're going to be working with and what professor you're working with before you step foot on campus. Just very, if you're interested in chemistry, synthetic chemistry is known that you're supposed to know who you want to work with, whereas biochemistry, it's okay to rotate So there's, as you were talking about earlier, like this hidden curriculum of like things that are acceptable amongst different subfields. So like that's really valuable information to get from a current graduate student, as well as like, you know, being able to, you know, they have friends who are also in PhD programs at other places that they can connect you to speak with about their experiences, or, you know, just get a general sense of like, are they happy? Do they get paid well? Are they, you know, are they feeling fulfilled and satisfied, and do they have good job prospects afterwards? So I think that was absolutely valuable. And it's, you know, it's, I think if you establish a pay it forward mentality, that's how you like set up these awesome mentorship rings where, you know, I've been very lucky that we've had lots of successful STAMP scholars in the past who could share their knowledge, and I try to do the same for those that come after me.
Other questions?
Hi, so I have a question for Manu. I'm really inspired by the fact that you studied abroad 3 times while doing research since freshman year, and I guess I'm wondering, how did you balance it all? Like, what was the routine? Do you have any advice for like wanting to globetrot while still doing a lot of academic activities and research?
Yeah, I'll say that my D plan was, I had the opportunity to have a lot of flexibility with it because I was pretty structured from my freshman fall in terms of when I was taking my pre-med classes and generally what I was interested in doing. It also helped, I think like 5 4-course terms. I did quite a few of them. Yeah, like I had to petition them to let me do another one. But as a result of that, I was able to do my double modified major and also study abroad 3 times. So that is a little bit of a part of that. I think that intentionality is the most important thing. Like, I was actually talking with a lot of my friends about this, and I was talking about how valuable my study abroad experiences were. And a lot of them were like, oh man, like, I wish I had thought, like, my freshman or sophomore year about whether or not that was something I wanted to do. Because for a lot of them, right, like, even if you're unsure about your major or what field you want to go into, like, there are certain steps I think you can take to sort of get a better idea for what you eventually want to move towards. But for a lot of them, they would just like sign up for like random classes every term. And then by the time you get to junior or senior year and you know, start to kind of finalize what you want to do, all of a sudden you're out of time, which I think is a more common phenomenon than it often appears to be at Dartmouth. So for me at least, like being completely honest, the way that I kind of moved past that was by my freshman fall or winter. I knew like, okay, like I'm interested in doing a major in the humanities and also the sciences. I know I probably want to go straight through to medical school, so these are roughly what classes I have to take when. The other thing that I think is also really useful is that if you just talk to like the department heads or the people who are responsible for like approving courses for majors, there is often a lot more flexibility than there may seem to be at first. Like I remember for like the global health component of my gender studies modified major, I think I counted like engines 12, bio 2, a geography class I took. Like I don't believe that any of them were like, I genuinely don't think that any of them were on the approved list of classes. But if you set up like a rational explanation saying like, these are the things I pulled from each of these classes and this is why it contributes in such a foundational way to this course of study that I'm designing, people are a lot more likely to maybe not bend the rules, but understand where you're coming from and why it's of value. Especially if you're doing something like a modified major where you are tailoring your path. Like my biology modified with engineering, it wasn't even biomedical engineering. I did like ecological engineering. So I kind of had a super random D plan with that respect. But I think that really thinking about like, if studying abroad or doing a double major or doing a lot of academic exploration is something that's of value to you, using that as sort of a guiding principle and choosing with intentionality what you want to take is super useful.
Can I just add something, especially those of you who might be STEM majors where you have less flexibility? We are offering more and more study abroad opportunities that happen like fall plus or winterim, so you can kind of fit it into the major. I think 2 of the ones that you did
Yes.
were exactly that, where you actually are not taking you're not taking a whole term off. You're doing it like in the winter period.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Other questions? This is meant for everyone. But first of all, thank you guys for being here. My question is, when you guys were applying to grad schools, do you guys have any tips for like, reaching out to specific professors? Did you guys reach out to labs, or was it more like, oh, just submit this application, they interviewed you and you just got placed? Like kind of how much reach out did you do? Like when did you start reaching out? Just kind of general tips like that. Thank you.
May I start? So this is something I found out through Mellon Mays, which I will share with all of you. Please reach out to professors in advance. I actually did not do that, but I just think I'm like very personable. So once they interviewed me afterwards, they were like, okay. But I didn't know that that was something that you had to do. I found out after I had applied, but it's really deeply encouraged that you reach out to professors that you want to work with. I'm actually working with an alum, Adam Bledsoe, who I think graduated 2012, geography here. And I think that was like a really interesting connection that we have, as well as someone else in the University of Minnesota geography department. But yeah, please reach out to professors. I think something that's also deeply worthwhile is just like making a list of considerations of like, what do you actually need? I think, when I listed off all the places that I applied to earlier, they were all in cities. Maybe not necessarily it's the same size, like Minnesota, like Minneapolis and like, I don't know, somewhere in New Jersey are not necessarily equivalent. But I felt that it was really important for me to like be able to go take myself to a movie or concert if I wanted to. Yeah, there's just like a lot of like hidden elements. I think when I was also thinking about like putting together my materials, I was really lucky to have worked on a personal statement for the Beinecke scholarship, which Professor Harner helped me with, as well as like some other professors, like Professor Michelle Warren. And I kind of had a draft built in because it was successful. So I worked with professors that I guess like already had existing and close relationships with because of the fact that I was their, I guess for Portuguese, like their research assistant, or they were my Mellon Mays faculty advisor, that I was just able to kind of pull in those folks as my letter writers. And I think it's really important to have a kind of diversity depending on like what you're trying to do or accomplish. Like for me, it was really important that the department see my ability as a researcher. So when I asked Professor Tish Lopez, at that point I was her student for like, I think I took 5 classes with her. So at that point she knew me very, very well. And she was also the chair of my thesis, my undergrad thesis. And then I asked just another professor that I worked with in a different capacity, Pamela Vocal. I had a fellowship with her doing work on like prison organizing and prison abolition, and that would be able to speak to my ability as an educator. I did a lot of political education and curriculum design, so that was important for me to, if I want to join the professoriate, that faculty members that I'm interested in working with could see that in some way, not just coming from me. And I asked the other person that was on my committee of my undergrad thesis, Professor Jorge Cuellar, and that was, I imagine, also fruitful, but I actually don't know what he said about me.
Sure, it was good. For any of you who are thinking about graduate school in the humanities or in the social sciences, the Beinecke, which Mariana just mentioned, is a junior year scholarship. And so when you apply, you have to produce a personal statement, which is 1,000 words. And so we often tell people is like, it's the best practice for grad school applications is just to write a 1,000-word personal statement about your research.
Sure.
And get the practice of asking people for recommendations and that kind of thing.
I was also going to say, like, the STEM equivalent of that would be the Goldwater, which is a fellowship that you can apply to. It's the most prestigious undergrad science fellowship in the U.S. that you apply either you're going into your junior or your senior year.
The campus deadline for Goldwater is December of your sophomore year or your junior year.
Sophomore, junior year.
Yes.
My bad. I was going to say, I think reaching out to professors is very important in the humanities. I'd like to add the caveat that I did actually consider applying to chemistry programs in the UK. In the UK, they strongly encourage you to reach out to professors beforehand, whereas in the US, for a lot of these admissions are done at the department level. So they say wait until you actually get admitted to the university or get admitted by the department and then start to reach out to us. But there's kind of a timeline to that. So you'll hear back about graduate school, for a basic sciences PhD in February or March. And then the clock starts ticking and it's over the next few months you should be reaching out to the professors that you're interested in working with in preparation for your time to arrive on campus. So, it may depend on the subfields. So some of the STEM subfields are a little bit different, but yeah.
I think we might have time for one more question. If there are.
I have a question for Manu and Catherine. So you guys talked about how you did some quantitative research through epidemiology and sociology, but you guys weren't QSS majors or math majors. So I was wondering did you think your research was kind of difficult because you didn't have quantitative skills that you learned through your major, your classes, and how did you gain those quantitative skills?
Okay. The STEM education at my public high school in Arkansas was not the greatest. So the last time I took a science class, I think I was 14, and we didn't have a lot of the advanced math courses that people have coming in here. So definitely at Dartmouth, the concept of STEM to me was so scary because it felt like something that had not existed for me or been accessible to me. But that being said, one class that my high school did have was AP Stats, and I had taken that, and I had those teachers who just will give you no wiggle room whatsoever. They just want it all, and if it's not everything that you've given, then you're not even gonna get an 85. Yeah, so I had that kind of teacher, and I mean, I think she was really formative for me because I was taking these statistics classes, and I was just this is the world. I don't know. I feel very metaphysically about statistics. So that being said, I'm really sorry. This is just who I am. But anyway, that being said, I ended up doing a lot of statistics in high school, and so I didn't take a lot of STEM classes at Dartmouth, but it all kind of came back to me, and I found the statistics I was doing in my quantitative project really intuitive. It never really felt difficult to me, and if there was something I didn't understand, my advisor was super helpful in just explaining things outside of class, or going over all the terminology or pointing me to different resources and textbooks. But yeah, that being said, I feel sometimes when you go to Dartmouth, everything that happened before your freshman fall kind of drops off. But I feel for me, even going to my high school, which isn't winning any awards for anything. I love them, but that was still really formative for me. And I think also to know that if you are coming to Dartmouth from a school that isn't an East Coast prep school, yeah, there's definitely an adjustment period. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about if you're from that background, but you still, your education does still mean something. And I don't know if that makes sense exactly, but basically I think I've said what I'm gonna say.
I'll keep it super brief. My research was within epidemiology, but I had no background in math or CS or biostatistics. So a lot of it leaned a lot more heavily into public health type work, doing literature reviews, synthesizing existing data and analyses to use as introductions or explanations for specific findings. I in fact took epidemiology 1 at Dartmouth, and it was really hard, so I dropped it. But that's to say, like, if you're even interested at all in medicine, like, not all of it has to be wet lab, not all of it has to be dry lab, computational stuff. It really can just be like public or community health work that you're interested in. And again, I think like all of your professors know that you're like 18, 19, 20 years old. They're not expecting you to be doing these analyses that they'd expect from like a PhD in biostats, right? So I think they're willing to sort of help mentor you to kind of find whatever a good fit is.
All right. So thank you, all of you for being here once again, for asking great questions, for listening, and thank you to the panelists for being incredible.